like to introduce our panel members. I'm going to start alphabetically, and it'll jump across and come back to the center here. But we have David Armand, the author of Mirrors, on the end down there. And David was born and raised in Louisiana. From 2017 to 2019, he served as the writer-in-residence at Southeastern University, where he is currently assistant professor of creative writing. And he is an award-winning author, including last year's Louisiana Writer Award at this very festival. And he has published 4 novels, 3 collections of poetry, and a memoir. This collection of essays was published by the University of Louisiana at Lafayette Press in 2023. And next we have Mr. Keagan LeJeune. I hope I pronounced it correctly.
You got it, yeah.
Being a Louisiana girl, I should.
Mm-hmm.
So he is also an award-winning author of several books and a professor of English at McNeese State University. He is the past president of the Louisiana Folklore Society and former editor of its journal, the Louisiana Folklore Miscellany. And he has collected stories about Louisiana legends for more than 25 years. Okay, and in the center here we have Mr. Jeremy White, who describes himself as a tenured cynic who penned the hopeful book. He founded South Louisiana's premier satirical publication in 2004, 8 years before relaunching the award-winning Red Shtick magazine in all its digital progeny. The Red Shtick.
It's a cumbersome sentence.
Okay, the red shtick. Okay, it's the same word.
Right.
I'm sorry. I apologize. I'm at my best today. A longtime football official and Mardi Gras crew captain, White earned a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering at LSU, where he met his wife, Edie, and they've been happily married since 1992 and live in Baton Rouge with their cat, Waffles. So I'm honored to be moderating this panel today, and I can attest to all 3 memoirs being well worth your time. They tell unique stories, but they manage to have a beautiful common thread that I think everyone, but especially people from Louisiana, will probably relate very well to. And I'd just like to share an observation that I made about them, the collection of them. And I don't even know if you guys are aware of the interconnectedness of your work here, but the common thread among these memoirs is the way in which we grow more acquainted with ourselves through knowing our own environments and our family, whether that means the family we know or the family we discover, or maybe even the family that we choose, much better. And I think that all of them have a beautifully organic way of expressing that discovery, yet each is unique as well. So I'd like to ask each of you to begin by reading a passage of your choice. And I'm hoping that the conversation can evolve rather organically, but if not, I have a few questions I can throw at you guys. So if one of you would like to get started.
Do you want to do it alphabetically again?
Sure. Yeah,
okay.
Ever since I was in school, my name always begins with an A, so I was always the guy who had to go first.
And I've always been the last.
I've always been in the middle.
So I have this introductory little, it's sort of like a foreword, for lack of a better word. It's pretty short. And it's titled, so this is a collection of essays, but it functions as a memoir. The reason I chose not to write it as a straight up memoir is because some of the essays were written before this mysterious discovery that I learned about later in my life, which I may or may not tell you, because then you'd be more intrigued to buy the book if I didn't tell you. And so I had started writing these essays and publishing them in various places. And this was one of the dreams that I always had as a writer, is that one day a magazine would actually reach out to me and ask me to write something and then pay me to do it. And that happened a couple of years ago, and it was Southbound magazine, which is like a glossy magazine you find in Barnes & Noble and stuff. I was like, whoa, I never thought that would happen. And so they sort of solicited this piece about, things that happened in Louisiana and stuff. It became the intro essay. And I think it kind of sort of sets up the theme of the whole book. And it's called Horiath, which the teacher in me can't help but just ask, how many of y'all know what that means? It happens to be my favorite word ever. I love the way it sounds. It's a beautiful word. It's a Welsh word, and it means like a deep, deep longing for the past, or maybe like a nostalgia to the 20th power. And I've always loved that word. And so the intro is titled Horiath. And it's only like a page. I think I can get through it pretty quickly enough. I don't want to eat up a whole lot of time reading, but when I was a kid, one of the few salves for the end of the summer and the beginning of another long school year was going to the St. Tammany Parish Fair in Covington, Louisiana. There was always that sense of anticipation and excitement as the weather cooled and eased into fall, the days growing shorter, a feeling that things were changing. I remember being off school on opening day, the parade that marshaled it in with its streamered floats and high school marching bands. And I always have to do this now. I'm starting to get blind. How the rides and booths had seemingly gone up overnight, filling the dusty, hay-strewn fairgrounds with their lights and music and the din of commerce, only for it to all be gone a few days later. We always started in the livestock exhibit, the sweet smell of hay and manure and animal sweat filling the still air of the cinder block barn, a few metal fans turning lazily overhead. I knew a couple of kids from school who were in 4-H, and I would see them standing next to a calf or a pot-bellied pig or a large golden rooster, its waxy feathers glistening in the dusty light. The judges would go around with their wooden clipboards and place blue ribbons next to the best ones. After that, we walked out onto the midway where you could hear the metal-on-metal skirl of the rides, the sounds of gears and well-oiled chains as bright, colorful cars moved over steel tracks, and their riders screamed in delight, or maybe it was terror. There were the bumper cars, the gravitron, the Ferris wheel. I remember all of that, and I remember the tanned leathery skin of the men behind the wooden booths, the carnival barkers, and how they beckoned us over with a palmful of plastic darts. You could throw them at a balloon on a corkboard wall, they said, and win a stuffed animal that was dangling from a drooping clothesline. One time I won a knife that you could slip into a leather case and clip to your belt. These days I don't think they would do that for an 11-year-old kid, but back then it was a different time. There was a sense of magic about it all, the things people make and do so that they can come together and spend time around each other, how we take in all these experiences to have something worth remembering and thinking about later. But many years have passed since then, too many to count. And so I come back to this same fair with my own family, my wife and 2 kids, where there's this feeling of what the Welsh call Horiath, a nostalgia that's so deep it creeps through your bones. And part of me wants to be that kid again, to remember when everything had the sheen of being new and life felt comfortably overwhelming. So I look down at my children, the lights glistening in their eyes, their hands sticky with cotton candy, and I can almost be there. Almost. And somehow that's close enough.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
I'm from Lake Charles. It's so fascinating. There's a word that I think about a lot when I was writing this book. It's a word that a philosopher coined, a contemporary philosopher, eco-philosopher called solastalgia, and it's about it's about nostalgia, but it's the way he describes it is the homesickness that you feel when you're at home, but when that home has been changed beyond what you recognize. And that was kind of my experience when I was writing the book after Hurricane Laura and the storms that followed and all the other events. And this, I think, is a memoir, but maybe I might call it more of a kind of an autoethnography, where I use myself as a way to kind of explore the places in Louisiana and their past and the landscape and how I fit into it. So I'll read the beginning of the book too. It's just called preface, so I don't have a We don't know our homes, our houses. It's not only the wildness of our backyards that I mean, the activities of the neighboring Tom or the quick-witted pranks the weeds pull while we're distracted one wet afternoon. But it's the normal things, the common stuff. It's the dirt we overlook and the rich history of the soil our homes scooch their big haunches into. It's the loam, and it's the past stitched with everything from mastodon bones and mollusk shells ground up in the loess to the plastic Davy Crockett figure forgotten by a child and buried over time. We neglect the hidden spaces inside the walls and the rot advancing in an unnoticed corner of the eaves. We turn our thoughts away from the unseen nest of wires in the attic or the tangle of pipes occupying our home's underside. But if we ever had to sit across someone and confess what we fail to appreciate, we might feel ashamed. The heat and coolness, of course, rattling through the vents, the water raring to go when we slide up the kitchen faucet, the steady churr of the fridge or the ceiling fan, or the whatever it is that's making that hum our ears have learned to ignore. Why does it take grasping around in the dark for us to be grateful for the lights? Why do we need water to be up beyond the wheel wells for us to appreciate the streets' dull concrete? We wait till then to promote, to promise that we'll never again come into the door without first planting a huge kiss on the fascia or the siding or the back steps. Why don't we hug the chrome doorknob or the welcome mat or everything we have and do it each and every time we're lucky enough to have it? I don't know. But it's funny how an evening's blackout or the gunmetal gray of a storm or the pluming smoke of a house fire can change that. I'm proof. In 2020, a complicated thing happened to me. The haze of ingratitude that I walked around in was engulfed by the greater fog of 4 federally declared disasters. Ironically, once that happened, I started to see. I didn't notice it at first. But one morning, I woke up and realized everything was already going, disappearing, just like the marshlands and estuaries along the coast. The oak trees were dying from saltwater intrusion. The marsh reeds' roots were letting go. Whole football fields of them were floating away. The people were uprooting too, and I was one of them. The only difference between them and me was that my slow drift away from this place wasn't physical. I've called Louisiana home my entire life. And sure, sometimes it has felt a little odd and alien and unusual, like a far country. But before the disasters of 2020, that strangeness had always been a part of Louisiana's charm. But now I couldn't sleep. I couldn't think. All sense of direction in my life had vanished, and I found myself lost in my birthplace and stripped of my birthright. I guess what I mean to say is one day I woke up and my body ached with a homesickness that swept over me even though I was still at home. At that exact moment, I was called to go on an adventure. I'll confess now to the paradoxes of it. Very little happened on this quest. I didn't travel all that far. I was usually by myself. And at the start, I held on to the idea that the trip's purpose might be to get myself unstuck from this place I call home. But by the end, I was left wondering if the entire point of the journey was to get myself lost, because that feeling was the only thing that could set me right again. I don't know. I could be wrong. All I know for certain is this: that journey is what comes in the pages ahead. You can judge it for yourself.
Thank you.
All right. So I know the panel is called, was it Journeys of Self-Discovery?
Yes.
The subtitle of my book, The Little Girl at the Bottom of the Picture, is A Journey of Selfless Discovery. And that's a tip of the hat to my wife, Edie, and her completely selfless motivation for submitting her DNA in early 2018 to just put herself out there, as she said. And a month later, she gets sucker punched at work with news that John Hart is her father. And he's worthy of books to be written about, and very complicated person. But so basically, we start out on a morning that one of the crazy mornings. So chapters 3 through 10 in this book each take place in one 24-hour period. They're all basically extended diary entries, and this comes from one of those. We kind of start with that, and then we back up and lay it all out. First chapter is titled 3 Suits, All Aces. It was pre-dawn in the middle of February 2018 at our home in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. My wife Edie, typically a night owl, had quietly gotten up sometime before me. Upon awakening in our darkened bedroom, I instantly knew where she was. The previous 2 mornings, we had received life-altering emails from seemingly incredible people we hadn't previously known. The 2 of us were like little kids excitedly waking up on Christmas morning, anxious to see what awaited in the inbox. Edie, wrapped in a white cat-adorned robe, cats on the robe, not real cats on the robe, sat at her desk in our office, awash in the glow from the hand-me-down computer. 3 images attached to a new message sent overnight from 2 time zones away, slowly loaded on the monitor. The first showed an adorable little girl and a beautiful woman with a warm gaze. Bundled up in winter gear, both wore wool caps and broad smiles. In the background was lots of water with what looked like mountains on the horizon against an overcast sky. In the next photo, the same darling little girl was being held by a handsome man with piercing brown eyes on a rocky beach. A craggy, tree-lined bluff projected a bit into the water behind them. The still adorable, grinning girl wore a different outfit in the third pic. Sunlight from the left, highlighted her blonde locks and lit the face of an older, white-haired man with her. He also shared a smile. He wore glasses and a couple days of gray stubble. I silently studied that last photo as my eyes continued to fully awaken. Coffee would have to wait. After a few seconds, I looked back to see that my winsome wife of over 25 years was staring straight ahead at that third picture. I was witnessing the love of my life look upon, for the very first time, her biological father. It wasn't yet 6 on a so far caffeine-free Wednesday. Just like the past 2 nearly equally insane mornings, Edie would be at work on time.
Thank you. So the first question I have for y'all, I guess I have to have 2 parts to. One for David and Keagan for the most part, and then a bit of a rephrasing of it for you. Sure. So it seems that in writing your memoirs, a lack or a dissatisfaction or an outright disaster had the power to shake you from the complacency of life into a journey that ultimately led to a greater appreciation. So, what do you believe are the essential components that you encountered on that journey? Because surely there was so much that happened that you probably had to choose carefully in terms of what you brought to the page. So, if y'all think about that, and then Jeremy, for yours, you describe yourself as a cynic, and yet here you write this beautifully hopeful book about someone else's experience, which doesn't seem very cynical. So, for you, I'm wondering what aspects of writing this did or did not initiate some change in your outlook on life? So if y'all want to ruminate on that and take a...
Well, I think I know the answer to mine because it was very obvious to me as I went along. So in the book, what I did was I tried to go to a few places. I went to places that meant the most to me. One was LeJeune Cove, where my ancestor founded, and though I'm kind of cut off from that place, and I went to this kind of cursed place called Coochie Break that I know about, and I went to Hot Wells, Louisiana, the home of a kind of a closed down healing resort. I went to a lot of places I knew and talked about the stories and the history there. But every time I was there, what saved me from feeling alone, what directed me and guided me from one spot to the next, what really kind of made a whole circle were the people I met. And it seemed almost, like fate, that in the middle of nowhere, with no one around, I happened to meet someone who could show me where to go and what to know, and then where to go next. The very last place I go, I didn't mean to go there. It was supposed to be a fun trip, to a camping trip to the North Shore, and it just so happened a couple days before I left, I found out one of my aunts passed away, and it turned into going to a funeral. And at that funeral, my cousins were there, and they made me see the world differently again. One of them was in the room. So the people, for me, that's what I had to kind of learn to reconnect to.
And you mentioned that there just seemed to be people who showed up to help you find the way.
Yeah.
So as you experienced that more and more often, did you develop a certain trust
it's funny
in that it would?
Because I know that. I've known that my whole life, that it's the people, That's what I've spent my whole entire career doing, is interviewing people and asking for their stories, and over and over again, they're the most welcoming. Even if they don't want to, my book before this was about outlaws, so they don't want to talk about those, So, but they would. So I knew it, but I had forgotten it, or really maybe I was so traumatized, or by everything.
Understandably,
Sometimes it's hard to live in Louisiana. I find.
Definitely, you have a beautiful line, I think it's toward the end of the book, that says Louisiana doesn't know whether it wants to be land or water. And it also ties into a theme about boundaries that you establish throughout. And I think that ultimately that relates to your finding the people along the way, because in some ways you have to lower your own boundaries so that when upon seeing you and you're asking this, you seem approachable and you are receptive to them, and the fences come down. And
too, and I don't want to take up, but it's also about learning what to value. The world tells us to value so many things, and it's often not people and who they are, and kind of things like the work you do or taking care with something that you love.
Right, the wrong things very often. Yeah. David, do you have any?
Now I feel like I forgot sort of what the question even was, but I think I still can address it. So for me, I had a very unique childhood, to say the least. I was adopted when I was 2 years old by an aunt and uncle, and the reason why is because my biological mother is schizophrenic, or was. She passed away a few years ago, and my whole life they told me, you're our nephew, but you're considered our son, and so they had 3 kids of their own who were my cousins technically, but I called brother and sister, or brother and sisters. And my whole life I was also told, and so I didn't see my biological mother until I was about 20. This was the first time I'd ever met her. And the reason why is because every time I would see her, because of her illness, it would sort of disrupt me, and it would caused me a lot of grief as a young child. So that the decision was made, not my decision, but the decision was made to sort of separate her from me. But I was always told my whole life that this man, Lonnie, was my biological father. My mother told me that, everybody in my family told me that, and they believed that. They weren't lying, they believed that. So fast forward to 2016, and I remember it was actually right before the flood, the big flood in 2016. A friend of mine had given me an ancestry kit, just as a little gift. And so I uploaded my DNA on there. A few weeks later, come back, and nothing really strange appeared. And so I'd check it periodically, and then I got a hit that said there was this guy on there who was my uncle, and his name was Larry Bean. I thought, who the heck is this guy? I've never heard of this person before. So I do what you do. You go on Google and Facebook and look up these people, and started to notice like physical similarities, and doing a little bit more research, found out his brother. And I'll never forget this. I showed my wife his picture, because I went on Classmates. I was doing all kinds of, I was like a detective, you know. And, I went on to Classmates and found a yearbook photo from when he was in high school, and my wife looked at it and she thought it was me, because we looked so much alike. Wow. And I'm not a very bold, aggressive person, but I looked him up, found his phone number in the directory or whatever, and texted him and said, hey, because he lived in Ohio and grew up in Ohio, so I couldn't make sense of how he would have met my mother or anything. And he texted me back and said, no, I don't know who that is. And then he said, but I used to live in Houston. I would go to New Orleans all the time, to party. And I thought, okay. And I don't think he realized at that point that he kind of painted himself into a corner. And so then I started doing a little bit more pushing. And again, that's not in my nature, but I was just so determined to know what this is about. And so long story short, he called me up on the phone. He agreed to take a paternity test, and it came back 99.99% for this man who I had never met. My mother didn't remember him, and she passed away right before I discovered him. And I don't think anybody knew. But it has been the most amazing experience. And so, naturally, I decided I should write about this, because I like the idea of happy endings, because some things aren't always happy endings. And we still talk. We just talked last Sunday, and it's weird when I talk to him, because I feel like I'm talking. He reads the same books that I read. He finishes my sentences. I finish his. And he lives in Pennsylvania. I've only met him twice in real life in the past 5 years. But I don't know if that actually answered your question, but
well,
maybe it kind of summarized my story.
I love that you told that story, because I did pull quotes just in case, because you never know. You want to be armed with a good quote every now and then. And the one about Lonnie is the one that I chose, and I loved how you ended that. He says that it's the kind, like making that discovery, it's the kind of thing that changes your life in ways you can't number, the kind of thing that makes you question who you are and who you've always been. And like you said, you wanted to write about it. So I think as a memoirist, discovering who you are on the page is part of the process that maybe the reader never really understands, but there's such a beautiful, to me, definitely spiritual component of writing in that way. So, and your story happens to be a perfect segue.
So, I have to, I think you mentioned it was the people that inspired you to write. And so your question was, how did a tenured cynic end up writing a hopeful book? And it's the people. This story, I met these people, we discovered them in early 2018, and we've met them and seen them several times since. And I've talked about this story a good bit, even though the book's 4 months old since publishing. And these are people that are so incredible and beautiful that I still have to check myself to not get choked up when I start talking about them, because it's incredible. Chapter 5 is called The Ideal Emissary. That's Edie's baby brother, Justin, in Renton, Washington. Just incredibly beautiful people. He's got a daughter who's our niece. We didn't know she existed 5 years ago. We fly up to SeaTac in chapter 15 through 17. Chapter 16 is called You Can't Fake That. And that's because of a conversation that we had in their home. You know, you meet people on the internet, and as beautiful as they are in writing, and we live in the age of catfishing and scams and everything else. And so you just have that little infinitesimal doubt in your mind, and it was their daughter Hadley, our new niece, that just obliterated. She became my new BFF like that. And I'm trying not to get choked up now, but it's the people. And you know, the end of the preface, the last two sentences, it says, in an age, let's see, well, the little girl also reminds us of a time when air travel was less perilous and we could safely hug strangers. In an age characterized by sickening inhumanity, this work celebrates the best of our humanity. Transcending issues of genealogy, the little girl appeals to readers seeking empathy in a divided land and authentic beauty in an increasingly ugly world. And so it really is a unicorn of a story. It really is.
It is. And as I said, I pulled a few quotes, and I think this speaks to exactly what you were saying. Jeremy writes, this book project taught me that in order to be real with the world, you must first be real with yourself. At the risk of being accused of plagiarizing John Hart, it's a hell of a lot more rewarding illuminating the abundant beauty residing in others, which may in turn help more folks discover the unrealized beauty within themselves. So I think that was a lovely way to say what this is all about, which is, and we said it in the previous panel, establishing connections and the expansiveness that we can discover not only within us, but among us if we are more authentic. And I love how you went on a physical journey. You went places and investigated. And yours was more of an inward deep dive and connections. And then I love that you've taken a journey on behalf of someone else in writing this. So in terms of taking all that y'all have learned and documented, how, and in writing my own, one of the things that I found challenging was just what to include, how much is necessary to convey what I'm feeling, what I believe is so important and could benefit others, but certainly not boring them to tears with, 5 stories of the same thing, essentially. So how did y'all make those difficult decisions in terms of what to keep, what to cut?
Well, I guess I could go first. For me, the task was a little bit easier since this is a collection of essays. And so when I was writing my memoir, I knew that I didn't want to write like the day I was born all the way until like the time the memoir is published. And so I thought, like, when I used to teach English 101, it's like your essay has to have a thesis. You have to have a purpose or a point. And so when I wrote that first memoir, the whole point of it was this sort of strange notion that my mother was schizophrenic, so she couldn't raise me. But then I got adopted by an aunt and uncle, and my uncle was a severe alcoholic and who was also undiagnosed or diagnosed but never told us as also being schizophrenic, which is kind of strange to go from one to the other. And I had a lot of, and I still have so he passed away in the year 2000. I was only 19, and from alcoholism. And, I still struggle with like reconciling the abuse with the love and the fact that he was actually the one who initiated the adoption for me. And this occurred to me the other day. He had 2 daughters, a biological son. The 2 daughters had kids, and since they were married, the kids' names have, their married names. And then my stepbrother never married, never had kids. And so now that my name is Armand, which is my adoptive dad's last name, and I have kids whose last name is Armand, it's strange because I'm the only one who's carrying on his name. His brothers had all daughters too. And I always thought, wow, that's really kind of powerful. So that was the point. That memoir was focused very much on this idea of going from one situation to another. Which one was worse? Would I have been better off with my mother? I don't know. This one was different because I had written all these over a course of years. They were essays that I had just submitted to journals, and it wasn't until I discovered my biological father that I decided to write the titular essay, Mirrors, which is about that whole process of going through the DNA results and the ancestry and talking to people who told me, don't pursue this. People said, you don't want to find out the bad news. And I said, I don't care how bad it is, I need to know the truth. And I know not everybody feels that way, but to me, I'd rather know the worst thing than not know. But I always did appreciate people's advice, even I know they meant well, but so it was a little bit easier to navigate this because they were separate, and they had been written over the course of maybe 10 years or so.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about in terms of the order in which you present them?
Yeah, so I was hoping you could ask that. And I don't want to eat up a whole bunch of time and dominate the thing, but this has sort of occurred to me after, so I'm also a poet, and when I put together poetry collections, I'm always thinking of the order that they're in and how they read. A friend of mine, Jack Bedell, who's was a poet laureate prior to
Allison.
Well, I don't know if it's prior to
Mona Lisa.
No, there was
it's
somebody
prior to Mona
before,
Lisa.
yeah.
And then Mona Lisa. So he was my mentor, and he said, don't overthink it. He's like, think of like an album that you like. He's like, they put their best song first, then some kind of good songs, then the next great song in the middle, and then they end on a bang. Yeah. It's like, that's how you structure your poetry collection. But for this, I was thinking differently because I thought, and I wasn't trying to be overly clever, and I probably shouldn't even say this because it's like showing my cards or whatever that saying is. But since the essay collection is called Mirrors, I wanted each of the essays to mirror each other. So it starts off with the intro, and then it ends with a coda, and I was thinking of like Pink Floyd, they always have albums with like part 1, part 2, and they have that. And then so the first essay is called Adoption, and it's about me being adopted. The final essay is called Mirrors, which is about me finding out who my father was and having this epiphany one day when I was looking in a mirror and seeing my father looking back at me, because I look exactly like this man, and my son looks a lot like me. So there's that. And then the next one is called Independence Day Part 1, which is about me getting into some trouble in high school when I during 4th of July, doing things I shouldn't have been doing. And then the second to last one is Independence Day Part 2. And without going through each one, there are 12 of them in there. But I used to have Mad Magazine when I was a kid. I don't know if anybody collected Mad Magazine. And my favorite part of it was at the end, you could fold this picture up into 4 pieces, and it would make like one different picture. And so I thought of these essays, like if you folded them all up, they all connect, they mirror each other. So I wasn't trying to be super duper clever, but when I discovered that, I thought, well, this is a great pattern for or a great way to organize the essays. So I'm glad you asked that, because I've been dying to tell people that, because it made me feel really smart when I figured that out.
Glad I could help that. And Keagan, you also are a poet. And when I was reading, so your book is so rich in imagery and symbol,
Thank
it
you.
seems. How did you, and I'm paying attention as you answer this because I
Okay.
need to learn, but how did you navigate that balance between telling the story, the narrative itself, and bringing it somewhere, and infusing it with such rich language? Like, was that even something on your radar, or are you just so good at it it comes naturally?
No, I mean, I do like language, and I probably sometimes too much, you know. I guess you talked a little bit about what to leave out. That was one of the really hard things about this book. I guess I feel compelled to tell the stories. I had three really impulses in this book. One is I wanted to tell the stories of certain places, like the story of Marksville, and I wanted to tell people that the legend of how it was called Marksville, and the hidden legend behind that, and the kind of history that was erased. And I thought that was important. So I felt committed to kind of keep that in there. And there's a few of those people and peoples I felt committed to. I also I felt compelled to tell people about certain Louisiana landscapes that aren't there anymore, or that are changing, like cane breaks and what they used to do and how they're gone, and so I felt like I couldn't leave that out, but I also wanted to make the book beautiful, and because I think that's what I care about.
Yeah.
So no, it wasn't it's not natural, but it is something that what I decided to do for this book that's different than the other books I've written, the more academic books, is to be honest, I guess, and more myself, and kind of show what I love and care about, which is language is one of those things.
Yes. And you've done a beautiful job of it.
Well, thank you.
Okay. And with yours, I am just blown away by the dedication and I guess it's a testament of your love for your wife, quite honestly, in telling her story so faithfully. And I'm curious to know, what about your own outlook on the world, if anything, has changed as a result of writing this?
Well, I kind of talk about in my media kit about it was weird. I went into this with my identity is represented, my previous identity is represented by my Twitter handle, Comic Ref, a comedian who has refereed football games. So that's where I went into 2018 with that, and into 2019. And by the end of 2019, I was done officiating football. Last game was the state championship of the junior college league in Mississippi. I started 2019 as the referee, the head guy with the field mic and everything for the LSU spring game in Tiger Stadium with Joe Burrow and the national championship team that year. They would go on and win. And by November, I worked my last contest and abandoned the satire site. Satire is dead or in an irreversible coma. I'm not sure yet, So I just went in all on this, and it's completely changed my outlook, because one, I'd been thinking I'd write a book. I actually started writing a book some time back. I'm glad I stopped because it wouldn't have aged well. But I've got lots of other books that we're working on, and so it's lots of things suddenly start to pop up. It's kind of like you clear all the bandwidth of two big old complicated rule books, football rule books, plus daily news cycles of news to have a satire site. You flush all that, it clears a lot of bandwidth, and suddenly it's like getting away from all the light pollution, and suddenly all these stars you never saw before are there. It's kind of the same thing.
Well, I know we just have a few minutes left. If y'all would like to ask any questions, I would invite y'all to do that.
Got a few folks over there too. Any questions?
I gotta ask one for him.
Okay.
Okay. Your real dad, did he have kids?
Yes, and that if there's a sad part to the whole story. So the great news is I was able to reach out to him. He took the test. We found out we're father and son, and he does have a daughter who is my half sister, who is, other than him, my closest relative that's still alive. And oddly enough, my stepsister was named Amy. His biological daughter's named Amy.
Wow.
And I've reached out to her a few times on Facebook, and she's rejected my request. I think she feels very odd about the whole situation, even though, when he had me, he wasn't married to her mother or anything. So it's not, and I'm not sure what that fear is, but I understand, I respect it, so I won't keep bothering her. But I would love, all I would love to do is just give her a hug, because it's like, wow, this is the closest living relative other than my father. And she looks a lot like me too, and she has a son who's the same age as my son. So that if there's a sad part, that's it. And there's also the possibility that there are more of me out there that he doesn't know about either, and maybe occasionally I'll check Ancestry to see, like here's a half brother, half sister, because back in the 70s in New Orleans, people were a little bit more relaxed about things than they are now, I guess.
We have another question.
One more. I was just curious.
Okay.
Was your real dad a loving man?
Yes, and that is this is the story that has the happy ending, is because he and I are so much alike. He reads. When I grew up in a little trailer in Folsom. We had 2 books in our house. Nobody was a reader, but I always liked to read. I don't know where I got that from. And then when I discovered him, I looked him up on Goodreads. He has like 6,000 books on there, and most of them were all books that I have read. Wow. And so, like now when we talk on the phone and stuff, it's like I feel like I'm talking to myself. It is bizarre, because he perceives things the way I do. He thinks the way I do, and even to this day, he has a girlfriend, and we Skype together, because they live in Pennsylvania, and she just stares at me, and she's like, it's so weird. You look like your dad looked when I first met him, And there's some weird little app called Face app or something, and my daughter showed it to me, and it makes you can like make your picture look older, and I did that to mine, and he showed that to like all his family that he's over, and they all thought it was him, because I look identical to this man. It is wild.
Yeah. We did have one more question in the back.
Yeah.
What about sending your book to your half sister?
I thought about it, yes, and I haven't, because he reached out to her and shared her response to him, which was leave me alone. And because he kind of left when she was real young, and her mom remarried, and so I think she's kind of bitter. But I still haven't given up that hope that one day I'll get to. She lives in Atlanta. She works for Delta Airlines. I know all about her. And I also look at her Goodreads a lot of times to see. I wonder if she's going to read one of my books one day, and she still hasn't. But I never give up hope. Yeah.
Okay, well, I believe that just about brings us to the end of the allotted time, but I just want to thank all of you, because you have all presented stories that help us better understand how the more expansive we can be in our own lives, the more, I believe, and I'm curious to know if y'all would agree, the more we will experience what some people might even call magic here and now. Yeah. And whether it's through nature or the connections we have with one another, it's all a part of the same thing that makes life worth living. And maybe your sister will discover that one day.
Yeah, I hope so. That would be the great.
So thank y'all so much.
Thank you all.